Hello, my name is Erin Hodson from the Entomology Department at Iowa State University. I'll be sharing my thoughts on improving your CV. Sometimes it's also called a curriculum vitae or just vita. I hope you have a better understanding of defining your CV brand by the end of this short video. A CV is a written overview of a person's professional experiences and other qualifications. In the biological sciences, like entomology, it is typical to have a CV that is over 20 pages long. So be prepared to include all your professional activities and awards over your career. Sometimes undergraduate and graduate students early in their degree program wonder why it's important to have an accurate and current CV on hand. While in school, your CV may be required by your graduate committee to review your progress, but it is very likely required for award and scholarship applications. As you get closer to graduation, or if you're a postdoc, your CV is often one of the first opportunities to express your interest in a position. It can concisely summarize your skills and get potential employers interested in you, and hopefully secure a job interview. During the interview, a CV can help further strengthen connections with potential collaborators and outline how you can make a great fit in the job. In our modern world, almost everything we see has a brand associated with it. Clothes, music, food, and entertainment all have recognizable brands that help us associate particular characteristics, values, and attributes of a company or organization. You may be wondering why I'm talking about brands with CVs. Some people actually do have a logo associated with their CV, but they are often working in design or graphics. Most of us in the biological sciences won't actually produce a logo. And although you may not have a logo associated with yourself, it is important to think about developing a style that says, this is who I am, and this is what you can expect of me. Think of it like this. How can you make yourself stand out if an employer has to look at 50 CVs? The next slides will help you think about subtle ways to define your brand. When creating or possibly overhauling your CV, it is important to think about the layout. In other words, what sections seem the most appropriate for you. Of course, the layout depends on your experiences, but usually starts out with your contact information and education. Other major sections could include awards, research experiences, teaching activities, work and extension, and finally, service and outreach. As you move along in your career and have different job responsibilities, section order may be rearranged. For example, I've had a 70% extension appointment for 10 years and have decided to list it before my research section. I could also imagine someone with a large teaching appointment putting those efforts up front if applying for a teaching job. You have to decide the section layout for yourself and be willing to rearrange it over the course of your career. In all the sections, it is important to identify when you were the primary contributor and distinguish it between more collaborative work. Don't try to overestimate your role, but instead be honest about efforts in group work. This is especially true for research, including presentations, publications, and grants. One of the first design considerations should be including enough white space. It is the portion of the page or the project that is unmarked, including margins and the space between columns. White space is a graphic design principle that creates a balance between positive and negative space. If too much information is crammed on a page like shown here, important details could be overlooked. Also, it is exhausting to the reader's eye to have a lot of words without enough white space. Ultimately, you want your CV to be easy to read, not a tedious task. I prefer a 1-inch page margin all the way around as a start to creating enough white space. Page margins that are too narrow create text that extends too close to the page edge. Conversely, if the margins are too wide, it creates too much white space, and that can look awkward. Sometimes job applications ask you to list your most recent work first. This can be especially helpful as your CV expands. So consider listing your publications and presentations in reverse chronological order to show readers your most recent activity. Also, think about adding numbers to your papers and publications so someone can quickly see how many activities you've generated over time. As your CV expands to over 5 pages, you may also want to consider adding a footer with your name on it. That way, readers who skim through your CV always know who you are. I've shown a simple footer here in this slide as an example. One relatively easy way to define your brand is to format section headers all the same way. I've listed 5 different styles here as examples. regular, bold, underlined, italics, and uppercase. Pick one that you like and use it throughout. You may also eventually create subheaders. Again, use one subheader style in your CV. One option that isn't used too often in our world is color in a CV. Color can help define your brand but should be used sparingly and with a purpose. Perhaps section headers could be in color. Just don't pick anything that's too harsh or dramatic. Sometimes section headers and subheaders can be separated by tabs. While they can be effective, too many tabs can be a distraction. My advice is to use tabs sparingly. Typography is probably one of the biggest ways to express your style, especially if your CV is the first chance for you to introduce yourself to someone. Of course, the font you use can say a lot about yourself, and it is important to convey a sense of professionalism. You can easily download thousands of free fonts online or go with the standard of Times New Roman. My recommendation is to use one font throughout your CV. However, font size and use of bold and italics can help make certain words really stand out, like section headers, for example. Spacing between words, called kerning, and spacing between lines should also be considered. This goes back to the concept of creating enough white space. Increasing the kerning and line spacing can make it easier for a reader to take in information. Perhaps some of you have heard of orphans and widows when writing up publications. The same concepts are true for your CV. As people skim through it, orphans and widows can be awkward. Sometimes inserting a hard break and moving text to the next page can reduce any confusion. When writing up publications, most people tend to use too many words. In the biological sciences, we must learn to be concise and accurate, and this is also true for your CV. As you add more details, think about only what you need. Trim out redundancy whenever you can. One quick way to move your CV to the bottom of the pile is to have typographical errors. I probably can't stress enough that you cannot simply rely on spell check. It won't catch all the common words and definitely will not understand scientific names. If you happen to spell the scientific name of an insect incorrectly, it is unlikely a reader will have a lot of confidence in you, especially if it happens to be their pet insect. In addition, too many abbreviations can be distracting and confusing, but can also sometimes relay a less than professional style. Another way to look unprofessional is to have grammatical errors in your CV. A simple thing like where to put the comma can be a CV killer for some readers. I encourage you to read more about using commas and other grammatical rules to make sure they are in the right place. In most situations, including personal information in your CV is not advised. While it is nice to know you have a life outside of work, that kind of detail is best reserved for another place. For example, during the interview, a potential employer may ask you about what your other interests are, and that would be a great time to share. My final thoughts on improving your CV brand is, most importantly, take a careful look and add your current activity about twice a year. That way you'll always be up to date on papers, presentations, and awards. Also, step back and take a look at your overall efforts. Does it look like all research and no service? Think about ways to be well-rounded so that you are perceived as a good university citizen. I also recommend that you have someone else proofread your CV, especially when you are submitting it for a job or an award. Depending on the need, be willing to rearrange your CV so that you can highlight the most important attributes for the position. I hope this was helpful to think about your CV. Thanks for watching.